Do you get overwhelmed when you walk into your local bike shop and you see all of these chain lubricants plus more? I know I used to. I still do sometimes, because every time I go to work, I feel like there's a new one. Like Silka has one called UFO lube now. I couldn't find that to bring it, so you get this as demonstration. In this video, we're going to discuss how you can feel more empowered to look at all these lubricants, understand what they're made of and what their job is, so you can know for your style of riding what you need. Okay, Dana. Why do I need chain lube? Doesn't my chain have like factory wax on it?
Yeah, the oil that is packed in your chain is not a great lube, actually. It's mostly just for making sure it doesn't rust while it's sitting on shelves. So even when you have a new chain, it's a good idea to put your own lubricant on it. But lubing our chain is important, one, for making our riding more efficient, but also taking care of our chain and our components so that they last longer, so that we end up spending less money on them in the long term. Like any moving part, there's gonna be friction in between every single link on your chain, and so we want to reduce that friction as much as possible to try to reduce the amount of wear going on in between your links.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah, the less friction that there is, the more efficient your riding is going to be, and the longer your chain is going to last.
Why can't I just use WD-40?
Don't use WD-40 on your chain. It's not really made for that. It's actually quite corrosive on some of your other bike components. So definitely get a bike chain lube.
All right, so we have a lot of chain lubricants here. What's one major difference between all of them? How many do we have here? We have 10, if I can count right, 10 different lubricants. What's one deciding factor between all of them?
Well, most lubricants kind of fall in one of maybe 2 or 3 different categories. So usually they will be labeled either like a dry lube, a wet lube, or perhaps an all-weather lube. So
all-weather, that's so confusing.
I know. And a lot of brands will throw in different words as well. Some are more wax-based, some are more oil-based, some will have, ceramic lube. So all of these terms you might see on a lube bottle. But when picking what lube is best for you, you kind of want to start off with what riding conditions you are in. So if you get nothing else from this video, just remember that dry lube is good for dry conditions and wet lube is good for wet conditions.
What if I'm mountain biking and it's mostly dry, but there could be puddles because it rained a couple of days ago?
Yeah, and this is where you can kind of decide if you want to either get a couple of different lubes. Use your dry lube for when you're mostly going to be in dry conditions, or you could go, if you only want to buy one lube and not worry about it, you can get one that's a little bit more of an all-weather.
Like these two.
The all-weather lubes are gonna be good for both wet and dry, but an all-weather lube might not be as good as a wet lube in wet conditions, and it might not be as good as a dry lube in dry conditions, but
so it'll kind of splitting the difference between the two.
A little bit, yeah. Just kind of making it easy for you so you don't have to go out and buy several different kinds.
Okay. So wet versus dry. I kind of divided them up while you were talking. That most of these fall into those two categories. Half are wet, half are dry, and then the all-weather's kind of in the middle here. Okay. All right, so we've got wet versus dry. All weather seems kind of so-so. Tell me more. Yeah, it's a lot. There's 10 different lubes sitting here still.
Yeah, so dry lube is really good in dry conditions because it doesn't collect as much dirt. So basically when you put your dry lube on, obviously it's in a liquid, so you're going to want to shake it up really well so that the liquid lubricator inside mixes with the lube itself. And then that lube will, after you apply it to your chain, dry off, and then that's why it doesn't collect as much dirt and debris. The less dirt you can collect on your chain, the more efficient it'll be. Again, the more like debris and stuff kind of get stuck to your chain, that's where it's going to start wearing out faster. It's going to be less efficient. It's going to make more noise. So if you use wet lube in a dusty condition, it's probably going to attract a lot of that dirt and dust.
Yeah.
Yes. On the other side, if you use a dry lube in wet conditions, it'll probably wash off pretty easily, and then you'll end up with just a wet chain that might start to rust, might start to squeak. The wet lubes
and
are
you're
really...
that guy on the group. Right?
Yeah.
Squeaky
You don't wanna be
chain.
the
Don't wanna be
squeaky
squeaky
chain.
wheel. Not in this situation. We don't want to be the squeaky wheel.
No. But yeah, the wet lubes will hang on and repel that water a lot better than a dry lube will.
Okay. What about, I see wax, ceramic, I even see Teflon in ingredients sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Do those lay into any of these categories, or how do I know which ones to avoid or which ones to go towards?
Yeah, so all of these kind of bases for each lubricants kind of have their pros and cons. Usually like a wax-based lube is going to be good in those dry conditions because the wax will kind of not collect all that dust and debris. Usually water soluble though, so it might wash off if you're in wetter conditions. If you've got a lube that contains Teflon, it might really help that lube reduce friction, but Teflon's not very environmentally friendly, so if you want a lube that's going to be more biodegradable, so you're not worried
It's like
about
washing that into Bassett's Creek
Yeah.
every time you dump it down the drain, basically.
Yeah, so there's all sorts of pros and cons. Ceramic lubes, again, are really nice at high performance, reducing friction. They'll probably come at a little higher cost, though, so you can kind of just weigh the pros and cons of what you're looking for in a lube.
Okay. Am I correct in my assumption that dry, waxy lubes can be applied, like, not right before I ride, but maybe the day of I ride, versus wet being I've got to kind of do that in advance of if I'm going on a big ride tomorrow, I should do it tonight?
So for dry lubes, you want to allow it time to dry before you start riding. That way the liquid applicator has time to evaporate and you're just left with the dry lubricant that doesn't attract any of the dirt.
Gotcha.
It's also a really good idea to try to get your chain as clean as possible before lubing it, because if it's already like dirty and dusty and you're just slapping some lube on top of that, all of that
Just
dirt and
getting
debris
caked
is
on.
just going to work its way inside. So you don't have to go through like a whole like drivetrain clean every time you put lube on, but it's always good to like get your rag out and try to wipe it off as best as possible.
How often should one be lubing their chain? I say should because we are the worst.
Yeah.
I think when you work on bikes all day, it's got to be like being a chef. You come home and you probably don't want to cook that much. Not speaking for all chefs, but
Yeah, so it does depend a little bit on what conditions you're riding in, but typically like once every like 100 miles-ish of riding. Again, really dependent on if you're riding in really clean or really dirty, messy conditions, how long that lube lasts, and also just like the different kind of lubes that you're using.
yeah. What if I'm not tracking my miles? Is there another way I can tell?
I would just estimate, if you're using, or I don't know, maybe you take a lap around your favorite bike park, that's 10 miles and you ride that 3 times a week.
Valid.
Just kind of
Assuming
keep a
I can
mental
do math,
tally.
Okay. So what about, and we're not going to get into it because it's not something we do at home, but what about people that wax their chains and use things like this? This probably shouldn't be in this lineup. This is a Silka Synergetic, like post-wax lubricating. It's very, very thick. It's oil-based. And it's supposedly very, very good. A lot of the guys at work use this and swear by it. This one bottle is $25. But if it works for people who are willing to wax their chains. So why would I wax my chain? Again, we're not getting into all of that. No crock pot here. But why would I wax my chain over just lubricating it?
Yeah, so waxing your chain is kind of all the rage. You see people get their big crock pot out and take your chain off and dip it in. There's pros to that. If you've got like the time and the setup to do that waxing procedure, it does really allow all that wax to get deep inside of the pins and rollers of your chain. And then it does last a while if you don't ride it in wet conditions where it's gonna wash off right away. But if you don't want to do the whole crock pot thing, dipping your chain in a little hot wax, they do make kind of like little drip bottles that have a lot of the same, elements of using the hot wax, but it's just a lot easier to apply. Doesn't take as much time. It might not be as deep of a lubricating experience as fully dipping your chain in wax, but it's kind of another option.
That's cool. I don't know that I knew about that. That's fun. Well, should we do a demonstration of how to properly lubricate your chain? Because Leslie's chain is quite dry from this past weekend.
Yeah, let's see how to actually apply chain to your lube.
Chain to your
lube. All right, so when you are ready to lube your chain, again, make sure to shake it up. It's easiest if you get your bike off the ground, so you can just back pedal. And you're gonna want to just place a little dab of lube on each roller. This is where we want the lube to really sink in and penetrate. And so if you want, take your time. Otherwise, some people get really antsy and just end up backpedaling and getting some lube on every single link. You might end up wasting a little bit of lube that way. But the goal is to get lube on every single link, and so that it can sink down into the roller and lubricate the pin and roller in there. And so once you kind of get used to that, go ahead and just get your entire chain. And this is the part where we don't want any excess lube on our chain that can, attract any dirt. So if you do, or if you're using wet lube, go ahead and wipe off the outside, because your outer links don't really need any lube on them. They really just need to sink on the inside there.
Well, kind of a simple explanation to a overly complicated market, if you ask me. Hopefully we understand a little bit more now about wet versus dry versus ceramic versus Teflon, what makes sense for you. Kind of sounds like at the end of the day, when in doubt, ask other local riders, ask your local bike shop, because they're familiar with what environment you're going to be riding in. They're probably familiar with what type of riding you do and what your actual like rain versus dry versus soil is like, especially if you're mountain biking. At the end of the day, it's a community effort, huh? A little bit.
Ask your friends.
Ask your friends and your local mechanic. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you learned something. See you next time.
Bye.